You still don't have a Sega CD? What are you waiting for? Nintendo to make one? You have seen the games, right? Wrong answer, man. Show 'em!
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Ultimate Sega Genesis review here on Player One Start. In the previous parts of this review, we went through the hardware, the graphics, sound, history, and development of the Sega Genesis, and pretty much almost everything, excluding the two add-ons. So that's right, in this video we're going to start talking about the add-ons. More specifically, we're going to start with the Sega CD. So in this one I'm going to dub the Ultimate Sega CD review, and because it's going to be split over multiple parts as well, I'm just going to go ahead and branch this off into its own little series. And believe it or not, there is a lot to talk about with this add-on. For example, this was actually one of the more successful CD-based add-ons of all the CD-based add-ons made for consoles, including everything until this day, I guess. The Sega CD is actually an interesting topic that is unique to the mid to early 1990s, because CD-based add-ons for consoles were only produced during this time. But almost every other console after this era would already have a CD drive built in, except for the Nintendo Switch, which is a prominent example of a console that still uses cartridges. Although I like to call them game cards. Cartridges, I think, are a bit bigger than the Nintendo Switch cards. But before I get too far into it, and I forget to say so later on, don't forget if this is your first time here to click that subscribe button and the bell icon to be notified when I make future posts. But now that we got that out of the way, the purpose of the Sega CD was to expand the capabilities of the Sega Genesis. Not only would it provide up to 320 times the capacity of a normal game cartridge, but it would also upgrade the graphics and sound. But the upgraded graphics and sound is almost like an unexpected bonus. The CD was the main selling point of this add-on. And that's because in the early 1990s, CDs were seen as kind of the future of where technology was going. Anything that still used those old bulky cartridges were going to be seen as something that was obsolete, or a kid's toy, or, someone that a Nintendo gamer would play. That's just something that was going to be obsolete. And Sega was a company that did not want to be seen as being obsolete. Their marketing relied hugely on the Sega Genesis being touted as the cutting-edge console. For example, blast processing was touted in their advertising as an advanced feature that the Super Nintendo couldn't even do. So when CD-based add-ons started coming out for other consoles, for example, NEC had one released for their PC Engine, and eventually here in the United States they released the TurboGrafx CD, that would mean that the Sega Genesis would start to look very dated very quickly, and Sega just really couldn't have that. So when Nintendo also announced that they were going to partner up with another third party to develop a CD-based add-on for their system, Sega thought it was a no-brainer. They had to put out something. But maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let's go ahead and take a look at the history and the development behind this hardware add-on. In mid-1990, Sega CEO Hayao Nakayama hired Tom Kalinske as CEO of Sega of America. Kalinske had developed and implemented his 4-point plan for sales of the Genesis. With initial reluctance from the Japanese board of directors, all 4 points were approved by Nakayama, which eventually led to skyrocketing sales of the Sega Genesis, as those that were waiting for the yet unreleased Super Nintendo in North America decided to buy a Sega Genesis instead. By the early 1990s, compact discs were making significant headway as a storage medium for music and video games. NEC had been the first to use CD technology, at least in terms of putting it inside of a video game console, when they released their PC Engine CD-ROM 2 system add-on in October of 1988 in Japan. Launched in North America as the TurboGrafx CD the following year, which sold 80,000 units in 6 months. That year, Nintendo announced a partnership with Sony to develop its own CD-ROM peripheral for the Super Nintendo. Commodore International released their CD-based CD-TV multimedia system in early 1991, while the CDI from Philips arrived towards the end of that year. Shortly after the release of the Genesis, Sega's Consumer Products Research and Development Labs were tasked with creating a CD-ROM add-on, which became the Sega CD. The Sega CD was originally intended to equal the capabilities of the TurboGrafx 16, but with twice as much random access memory, and sell for around $150 US. In addition to relatively short loading times, the team planned the device to feature hardware scaling and rotation similar to that of Sega's arcade games, which required a dedicated digital signal processor, or DSP. However, two changes made later in development contributed to the final unit's higher than expected price. Because of the Genesis's Motorola 68000 CPU being too slow to handle the Sega CD's new graphics capabilities, an additional 68000 CPU was incorporated in the add-on itself. In addition to hearing rumors that NEC planned a memory upgrade to the TurboGrafx CD, which would bring its available RAM from 0.5 megabits to between 2 and 4 megabits, Sega decided to increase the Sega CD's available RAM from 1 megabit to 6 megabits. This proved to be one of the greatest technological challenges since the CD's access speed was initially too slow to run programs effectively. The cost of the device was now estimated to be at $370, but market research convinced Sega executives that consumers would be willing to pay more for a state-of-the-art machine. Sega partnered with JVC, which had been working with Warner New Media to develop a CD player under the CD plus G standard. Until mid-1991, Sega of America had been largely kept uninformed of the details of this project. They didn't even have a functioning unit to test, although Sega of America was provided with the preliminary technical documents earlier in the year. A former executive of Sega of America noted that there was distrust between Sega of Japan and Sega of America, stating that they only wanted to provide dummy units because they were afraid of what would happen if they leaked out the technical specifications. However, they were finally able to get a working machine by acquiring the system ROM chip and putting it into a dummy unit. Sega of America was also frustrated by the Sega CD's construction, with some being especially critical of the consumer-grade audio CD drive that was used instead of a CD-ROM drive, which were better suited to reading data discs. Also, right before the launch, the quality assurance teams started running into severe problems with many of the units literally bursting into flames. Teams worked around the clock trying to catch the failure in progress, and after about a week they finally realized what was happening, citing the need for games to use more time seeking data than the CD drive was designed to provide. The Sega Mega CD launched in late 1991 in Japan, and though the unit sold quickly, the small install base of Mega Drives in Japan meant that sales sharply declined. Third-party development of games for the new system also suffered because Sega took a long amount of time to release software development kits. Other factors affecting sales at the beginning included the high launch price and only 2 games available at launch. On October of 1992, the Sega CD was released in North America with the retail price of $299. Advertising slogans included, "Welcome to the next level." Though only 50,000 units were available at the launch due to production problems, the Sega CD sold well over 200,000 units by the end of 1992. As part of Sega's sales, Blockbuster Video purchased several Sega CD units for rental in their stores. One feature emphasized by Sega of America was the benefit that the Sega CD's additional storage allowed for a large amount of full-motion video games, with Digital Pictures becoming an important partner for Sega. Sega released a second model of the Sega CD in April of 1993. It was released in North America several months later at a reduced price of $229, bundled with one of the system's best-selling games, Sewer Shark. The Sega CD2 was designed to bring down the manufacturing costs of the Sega CD. The newer model is smaller and does not use a motorized disc tray. A limited number of games were also developed that used the Sega CD and the later 32X add-on that was released in November of 1994. However, it was in late 1993 when the Sega CD would gain the most notoriety, at least here in the United States. On December 9, 1993, the United States Congress began to hold hearings on video game violence and the marketing of violent video games towards children. One game at the center of this controversy was Sega CD's Night Trap, a full-motion video adventure game designed by Digital Pictures. Night Trap had been brought to the attention of U.S. Senator Joe Lieberman, who said, "It ends with this attack scene on this woman in lingerie in her bathroom. I know the creator of the game said it was meant to be a satire of Dracula, but nonetheless, I think it set out the wrong message." Lieberman's research concluded that the average video game player was between 7 and 12 years old, and that video game publishers were marketing violence towards children. In the United Kingdom, questions were also raised about its suitability. This came at a time when Sega was capitalizing on its image as an edgy company with attitude, and this only served to reinforce that image. And even though there were increased sales as a result of the hearings, Sega recalled Night Trap and released it with revisions in 1994. Following these hearings, video game manufacturers also came together in 1994 to establish a unified rating system. The Entertainment Software Rating Board was born. However, this did not hurt sales of the Sega CD or the game Night Trap. In fact, all the publicity surrounding the Sega CD and Night Trap actually spurred sales of the game and the console. So with that said, why didn't very many people seem to remember owning a Sega CD? Well, in terms of CD-based add-ons from this time period, the Sega CD actually sold the most out of its competitors, with around 2.25 million units sold before being discontinued. So what caused a decline in the Sega CD? Well, mostly it was newer CD-based consoles such as the 3DO Interactive Multiplayer. These consoles would render the Sega CD technically obsolete very quickly, and that reduced the public interest. After all, most people who adopted this console wanted to show off that they had the latest and greatest technology. Unfortunately, technology in the 1990s was always ever-changing, with home computers not only doubling and sometimes tripling their processing power within a period of about 6 months. In late 1993, less than a year after the Sega CD launched in North America and Europe, the media reported that Sega was no longer accepting in-house development proposals for the Mega CD in Japan. In early 1995, Sega shifted its focus almost exclusively to the Sega Saturn, having discontinued advertising for Genesis hardware, including the Sega CD. Sega officially discontinued the Sega CD in the first quarter of 1996, saying that it needed to concentrate on fewer platforms and felt the Sega CD could not compete at its high price and outdated single-speed drive. So that history is kind of intriguing because you almost wonder why the Sega CD wasn't its own console. Think about console upgrades today. The closest equivalent I could find would be something like the PS4 Pro over the PlayStation 4, providing better graphics and, I don't know, maybe better sound than its predecessor, the PS4, without actually being the next console. The Xbox One X is the same exact deal, providing 4K graphics over the original Xbox One's graphics. But even still, that was an optional upgrade. You didn't have to buy those upgraded consoles to continue to play the latest and greatest games. On the Sega CD, you had to have the add-on to play the games that worked with the add-on. You couldn't just play it without it. So why is this an add-on instead of its own system? Well, let's go ahead and take a step back and see where the Sega Genesis was in 1992. It actually was only a couple of years into its life cycle here in the United States, and a lot of people who just bought the console probably would have been upset that Sega released yet another console that made it obsolete within a year or two of buying the original. And add to that the Sega CD was not going to add the next generation of graphics, it wasn't going to be a huge leap from the Sega Genesis, then people might not have seen it as really that worth it. But the biggest advantage to releasing it as an add-on instead of its own console was the fact that it was designed to work with the Sega Genesis hardware, theoretically increasing the capabilities of the add-on. Theoretically, the Sega CD's capabilities is increased by having the Sega Genesis hardware. It uses both. So from the consumer's point of view, you're actually saving a little bit of money because part of the hardware you need, you already own. However, if you didn't already own a Sega Genesis, you would have to pony up the over $200 for the add-on, plus the cost of the console, which I think around 1992, 1993 was becoming more and more affordable, but it was still an extra expense. So there were a few advantages to releasing it as an add-on. But to really understand all of the advantages, we'll have to take a look at the hardware, which we will do in the next episode of this series. So that's right, go ahead and stay tuned next time for the Ultimate Sega Genesis Sega CD review, where we will tear down and take a look at the hardware of the Sega CD, and we'll take a look at graphics and sound. That said, that's actually going to wrap it up for this video. Remember, if you like what you see, please hit that like and subscribe button, share with a friend. Remember, you can reach out to me on social media. Please leave a comment below and leave a like if you liked today's video. Let me know what you guys thought about today's video in the comments. As always, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. If you like this video and you'd like to help out with future projects on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Again, I want to thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.